Welcome to 5 Minute Bible, your daily guide for your daily reading. Today's June the 3rd, and we'll be looking at Proverbs 1 through 3. After seeing covenant love flourish beneath God's good design in the book of Song of Solomon, we now move into the foundational source of that wisdom itself. Today we begin the book of Proverbs and officially enter the wisdom literature of Solomon in full. Proverbs 1 through 3 lays the foundation for the entire book by introducing the fear of the Lord, the two paths of wisdom and folly, and the urgent call to pursue wisdom above every competing voice in the world. These chapters are not merely about intelligence or practical advice, they are about learning to see reality through the wisdom of God Himself. And in that way, Proverbs 1 opens by explaining the purpose of the book. It is to give wisdom and discipline and understanding and discernment and righteous judgment to His Son. The foundational principle is then clearly established in the beginning that the fear of the Lord is the beginning of knowledge. And this chapter immediately contrasts these two competing voices. On the side of the street stands the seductive call of the sinners, inviting the young into violence and greed and rebellion and easy gain. And yet on the other side stands Lady Wisdom herself, crying out publicly and warning that rejecting God's wisdom ultimately leads to destruction. In Proverbs 2, we see that the reader is urged to seek wisdom like hidden treasure, because wisdom protects and guides and preserves those who walk uprightly before their God. Proverbs 3 calls the believer to trust in the Lord wholeheartedly rather than leaning upon one's own personal understanding. This chapter repeatedly emphasizes that wisdom produces peace and stability and blessings and discipline, generosity, security, and even flourishing beneath God's covenant favor. So as you read today, I want you to ask the following question. What foundation will govern how we think and live and desire and interpret reality? Because these chapters show us that true wisdom begins not with human autonomy, but with a humble submission to the Lord. And in that way, the central pattern in these chapters is the contrast between the two paths demonstrated by Lady Wisdom and Lady Folly. The two paths are covenant faithfulness and rebellion. And in that way, the central pattern in these chapters is the contrast between the two paths demonstrated by Lady Wisdom and Folly. Covenant faithfulness on the one side and rebellion on the other. Life for those who follow Lady Wisdom and death for those who follow Lady Folly. Proverbs refuses to treat wisdom as a kind of morally neutral intelligence. A person can be clever and still be a fool before God, and true wisdom begins with the fear of the Lord, meaning humble reverence and worshipful submission and covenant loyalty and rightly seeing reality under God's authority. So in that way, Proverbs is giving us two women who lead to two paths, and only one of them leads to life. Another major pattern is the parental structure of the book. Again and again, the language appears, my son. Wisdom is being handed down covenantally from a father to a son, from generation to generation. It's not abstract theology or philosophy detached from daily life. It's fatherly instruction that's shaping the loves and the desires and the habits and the imagination and worldview of his covenant child. Proverbs also presents wisdom as a battle of competing voices. Again, folly constantly offers shortcuts and greed and violence and pride and self-reliance, sexual temptation and instant gratification. Wisdom, however, on the other hand, calls people towards covenant fidelity, patience, and righteousness in the fear of the Lord. And all of this presses into our life with tremendous clarity because every culture disciples people into some vision of wisdom. Families, schools, media, politics, entertainment, social pressures, digital voices, they're all constantly calling for and shaping how people interpret reality. The only question is whether that wisdom begins with the fear of the Lord or with human autonomy. Proverbs insists that all life flows downstream from that fundamental choice. And in that way, these chapters ultimately point us to Jesus Christ, who is himself the wisdom of God incarnate. Proverbs presents wisdom almost as a living voice calling humanity toward life and truth and righteousness. And in the fullness of time, that wisdom appeared to us in human flesh in the person of Jesus. In that way, Jesus perfectly feared the Lord, perfectly obeyed the Father, perfectly walked in the path of righteousness that Proverbs is describing, where humanity consistently fell off the cliff of folly. Jesus, on the other hand, embodies flawless wisdom. And in that, Proverbs 3's call to trust in the Lord with all of your heart only finds its truest expression in Jesus, who himself entrusted himself to the Father perfectly, even unto death. And through union with Christ, believers are not merely given better advice for living, they are brought into the very life and into the wisdom of God that belongs to Jesus through the Spirit. The gospel transforms fools into wise sons and daughters who increasingly learn to walk in the fear of the Lord beneath the reign of Christ, the greater Solomon. So as you read Proverbs 1 through 3 today, notice how wisdom begins shaping the heart and the desires and the imaginations and the worldview of God's people from the inside out in every nook and cranny of life. And tomorrow, we will continue deeper into Proverbs and see wisdom becoming intensely practical as it guards the heart against corruption, laziness, deception, and sexual temptation. But with that, read your Bible carefully, devotionally, and joyfully, and may the Lord use his word to sanctify you completely, and we will continue our journey tomorrow. God bless you.